When was the last time you learned something valuable from someone you genuinely dislike? If you're having trouble recalling, you're not alone, and there might be a reason for that. Let me introduce you to a peculiar problem that comes with being at the top of the food chain. For most of human history, our ancestors lived in survival mode. Every rustle in the grass could be a predator. Every stranger from another tribe could be a threat. In that environment, your senses stayed sharp. You had to see the world as it actually was, not as you wished it to be, because the cost of being wrong was death. We find ourselves in a strange era. We have reached the status of apex predator. We have won the evolutionary game. There are no saber-toothed tigers waiting in the bushes, no wolves circling the campfire. And this monumental safety has resulted in a strange side effect. We have begun to give weight to emotions that evolution never intended. Our brains never quite caught up. We still have the emotional architecture of creatures who needed to make snap judgments to survive, but now those snap judgments get applied to everything, including people. Someone cuts you off in traffic, threat response. A coworker disagrees with your idea in a meeting, tribal enemy. A public figure says something you find offensive, exile them from your mental kingdom. We've taken the survival instinct of quick categorization and turned it into something else entirely, something lazier, something that might be costing us more than we realize. But what exactly are we losing? That's worth exploring. Imagine for a moment that your mind contains a filing cabinet. Every person you encounter gets sorted into folders: friend, enemy, smart, stupid, good, bad, one of us, one of them. It's efficient, really. It takes about 3 seconds, a glance at how someone dresses, a single sentence they say, a political opinion, a religious belief, maybe just the sound of their voice, and then filed, sorted, done. The brain loves shortcuts, it loves compression, it loves turning a full-length novel into a headline, and people are the easiest thing in the world to compress. You can reduce a lifetime into a rumor, a complex mind into a single adjective, a human into a symbol. The problem is that you're not filing documents. You're filing entire human beings. And human beings, it turns out, are not simple enough to fit in any folder. Consider this: every person you've ever met is the product of thousands of experiences you know nothing about. Childhood memories that shaped their fears, random encounters that altered their trajectory, books they read at 17 that rewired their thinking, heartbreaks and victories, and small kindnesses and devastating betrayals, all of it swirling together into something impossibly complex. And what do we do with all that complexity? We reduce it to a label, sometimes a sentence, often a single word. I think there's a possibility that only in hindsight, maybe generations from now, will humanity fully appreciate how much we underestimated our own intricacy. We may look back at this period and be surprised by how aggressively we simplified each other, how confidently we believed a single paragraph could stand in for a lifetime. But here's the question I want to sit with. What happens to the lessons hidden inside people we've already filed under enemy? There's a concept from a certain magical story that might serve us here. In those tales, there's a sword that can only be pulled from a hat by someone worthy, the Gryffindor sword. But the sword has another property. It only takes that which makes it stronger. What if we could do something similar with people? Not absorbing anything literally, of course, but imagine approaching every person, even the ones you dislike, with a kind of selective attention, looking for the specific thing they do well, the trait they possess that you wish you had, the skill they've mastered that you haven't. Someone you find arrogant might also be extraordinarily disciplined. Someone you consider cold might have an ability to make decisions without being paralyzed by emotion. Someone whose politics repulse you might be brilliant at building coalitions or communicating ideas. The invitation here is to separate the lesson from the teacher. Think about someone you strongly dislike, not a cartoon villain, a real person, someone who irritates you, frustrates you, offends your values. Now here is an uncomfortable possibility we can explore together. That same person may also do something exceptionally well, something you quietly admire, something you would copy if it came from someone else. Most of us edit that part out. We treat admiration like a loyalty test, as if noticing strength in someone we dislike somehow weakens our own position, as if learning from an enemy feels like betrayal. When a person does something clever and something foolish, it might be possible to acknowledge both, to say there was wisdom in that and there was error in that. Learn not to repeat the error, aspire to replicate the wisdom. The same could apply to strength and weakness, courage and fear, generosity and selfishness. But here's the part that feels almost impossible. doing this with the people we actively hate. Let me tell you about a hidden cost that rarely gets discussed, the tax of hatred. When we hate someone, we tend to do something curious. We erase their virtues, not consciously necessarily, but hatred has a way of installing filters on our perception. Once we've decided someone is bad, we become incapable of seeing anything good they do. It's as if the filing cabinet we discussed earlier has a special drawer labeled enemies, and once someone's in there, all evidence of their positive qualities gets automatically shredded. Few people ever speak a kind word about those they despise, and I'd like to suggest that this might be one of the most expensive habits a person can have, because here's what we might be overlooking. Some of history's most problematic figures were also remarkably effective at certain things. They built movements, they inspired loyalty, they communicated with power. They persisted against overwhelming opposition. To look at these abilities and simply refuse to acknowledge them isn't moral superiority. It might just be intellectual laziness wearing ethical clothing. The person you hate might be terrible in many ways, but they might also possess something you need, a skill, a perspective, a strategy, and if you've decided that everything about them is tainted by their badness, you'll never see it. There's a phrase I want to return to later, the luxury of blindness. It's something we've granted ourselves, and like most luxuries, it comes with a price we don't immediately notice. Here's what might be the strangest part of being an apex predator with no natural enemies. We've become so safe that we've started to believe certain kinds of blindness are affordable, that there are things we can choose not to see without consequences, that we can dismiss whole categories of people and still have access to all the wisdom the world offers. In survival mode, this would be unthinkable. If you're hunting in the wilderness and you hate wolves, you don't get to ignore their hunting techniques. They're trying to kill you. You have to study them, understand them, learn from them. Your hatred is irrelevant to your need for knowledge. To stand any chance of survival, you have to see the world as it is, not as you wish it to be. But wrapped in the cotton wool of modern safety, we think differently. We scroll past someone we disagree with. We unfollow the person whose views offend us. We construct information environments where everyone agrees with us and the enemy is always stupid, always wrong, always devoid of anything worth learning. And maybe that feels comfortable. Maybe it even feels virtuous. But consider this, what if the comfort itself is the trap? What if the very safety that allows us to turn away from discomfort is the same safety that's slowly narrowing our vision? So what might we do about this? Let me offer a possibility. It starts with a simple mental exercise. The next time you encounter someone you dislike, whether in person, online, or even just reading about them, try asking one question. What is this person good at? Not what makes them tolerable or what's their one redeeming quality, but genuinely what skill, trait, or ability do they possess that I might want to develop in myself? This isn't about pretending they haven't done harmful things. It isn't about softening your moral judgment. It's about refusing to let your emotions veto your education. We might try to practice it as a new form of vision. It is a vision that requires us to walk into the enemy camp intellectually and look around. What are they doing right? How did they gather that support? How did they solve that problem? You don't have to join them. You don't have to like them. You just have to realize that skill does not only grow in the gardens of the righteous. Sometimes it grows in the mud. This is about acquisition. It is about realizing that every person is a simulation of a different way to live. Some simulations fail and we learn what to avoid. Some succeed and we learn what to copy. Most are a mix of both. Think of it as extracting the metal from the ore. You don't keep the whole rock. You don't have to admire the rock. You just recognize that somewhere inside that unappealing exterior is something valuable. And you take only that. You may shape your thought like this. There's a man whose political views I find deeply troubling, whose public statements often make me cringe, but he's also one of the most effective communicators I've ever observed. His ability to take complex ideas and make them land with ordinary people is genuinely remarkable, and I can either refuse to acknowledge that because I dislike him, or I can study it and apply it to causes I actually believe in. There's a business figure whose personal behavior raises serious ethical questions, but her ability to build and maintain strategic partnerships is something I've learned from extensively. The lesson doesn't become contaminated by its source, the wisdom doesn't spoil because of who offered it. What if that certainty is its own kind of assumption? What if the very act of hating someone has convinced you to stop looking at them clearly? Remember the luxury of blindness I mentioned? This might be where the invoice arrives. We've gotten so comfortable in our safety that we've allowed ourselves the indulgence of selective vision. We've decided certain people are beneath our consideration. We've convinced ourselves that learning from them would somehow be a betrayal of our values. But the apex predator who forgets how to see the world clearly isn't really at the top anymore. They're just protected enough not to notice their own decline. This is not about becoming softer. It might actually be about becoming sharper. Because the world does not become simpler when we ignore parts of it. It just becomes less visible. And invisible terrain is where most people trip. There is a cost we have not fully priced. Maybe it is this. Every time we refuse to learn from someone because we dislike them, we outsource that lesson to pain later. Life tends to teach eventually, one way or another. So perhaps the invitation is this. What if we could approach the people we've dismissed and ask ourselves what they might be holding that we need? To see them clearly, without the filters of hatred clouding what's actually there. The lessons you might need most could be carried by the people you'd cross the street to avoid, and the only thing stopping you from learning them might be the belief that you already know who's worth learning from. If we are truly as safe as we think, maybe we can afford to see more, not less. Maybe clarity is the real luxury of being at the top. Maybe the danger is not the enemy we name, but the parts of reality we decide we can afford to ignore. Because it is possible that the people you dislike most are not obstacles in your path, but unlabeled training equipment, awkwardly placed, poorly explained, easy to walk past. And if that is true, then perhaps the blind spot was never them at all. It was the assumption that once we reached the top, we could stop paying attention.